You're all very welcome along here today. We're here to mark the centenary death of Séamus Quirk, whose life was cut brutally short by armed police force. And we were here to acknowledge and to pay our respect for the huge dedication and sacrifice that was made by Séamus in defending the Irish nation. And we'd like to acknowledge Bernice, whose nephew is
husband is Séamus Quirk's nephew.
Is Séamus Quirk's nephew.
Yeah, Bernice was later.
Bernice. Thanks very much, Bernice. Yeah, we could observe a minute's silence just. And if we could have Fergus to do the oration.
Dis mar agah goine úsla agus fáilte chuig Bernie Quirk, Bernice Quirk chuig an Shermanna seo. Tá méid bailithe in áit fíortáchtach don náisiún na hÉireann agus tá Séamus Quirk chuirthe in áit anaháchtach do bhuiintear na hÉireann sé sin léachra go léir Corcaigh bailithe le chéile chuirthe an seo daoine a tháinig ó dlún úntach. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Bernice Quirk, who is married to a nephew of Séamus Quirk. And just to say, when we started looking at the life of Séamus Quirk, certainly I read a lot of Irish history, but I was astounded that a young man as he was, and there's a photograph of him here in the material that I have, he had reached the rank of lieutenant in the Fianna in Cork before he went to Galway. Now, he was going to a county that was far less well organised from a Republican point of view than the one we come from here in Cork. And it seems to me that only for the education that the Galway men who were taken after the 1916 Rising got in Frongoch in Wales, that Galway would have had a huge problem. But there were 300 Galway men imprisoned in Frongoch in Wales, and when they returned to Galway, I think what they did essentially was they organised the volunteers and Sinn Féin in every parish in the city and county of Galway, and got an astounding result of totally turning the voting patterns of the people of Galway, city and county, on its head in the space of the few months that they were there organising. So in effect they got the mandate in Galway, the same as they did in every other part of the country, for Ireland to make a strike for its freedom, and in agreement with the Sinn Féin policy of having the MPs, as they were, become Teachta Dála in Dáil Éireann. That mandate was reinforced, as you're all aware, in the local elections that followed in January of 1920. So Séamus Quirk was working for the forces of Ireland in striking for freedom and in defending the democratic decisions of the people. And there were two decisions at that stage. There was a third democratic decision to follow in May of 1921. So 3 times the Irish people were asked, did you want Irish independence? Did you agree with what the people who were pushing for independence? And 3 times the Irish people agreed. Séamus Quirk was, I don't know how, perhaps we'll find out in time in talking to members of the family. I'm not sure how it occurred that he was actually working with the Irish forces, the IRA, in Galway, as distinct from Cork, where he had been in the Fianna. But in any case, Galway town, as it was called then, wasn't in a great shape. It was the headquarters of in excess of 2,000 Crown forces, various regiments of the British Army, and an incident occurred in the railway station in Galway city, where the volunteers were receiving arms that were going to be used on an attack on Clifton RIC barracks. The train pulled into the station. It pulled into the guard hut outside of the station. The arms were taken off, but at the same time, within the station, there was a drunken black and tan man named Crum. He was actually losing the head with his revolver and shooting all around the place. So the volunteers that were in the station on other business got control of Crum and shot him. He had basically fired all over the place with his revolver, and he was killed in that incident. And in response to that, the British essentially cut loose in Galway, and one of the first people that they went for was Séamus Quirk, who was the adjutant of the Galway Brigade at that time. They went to where he was having lodgings, and Bernice tells me that the family lore is that he had left the lodgings to protect the family because he knew, because of what had happened, that there was going to be a problem. But the British came for him and caught him on the street leaving the lodgings. They dragged him down to the docks. They shot him 11 times in the stomach and left him dying on the road there. He was actually, as I understand the history of it, he was actually suffering until morning, and he was attended by a Father Griffin, who gave him the last rites, and he died, I would say, in a fair bit of agony. So if any man suffered for Ireland, this man did. Father Griffin, that gave him the last rites, was later on also murdered by the British forces and secretly buried. His body was discovered a few days later. But Séamus Quirk and another volunteer who had been killed in the incident in the train station were given the biggest funeral that Galway had ever seen. But the British came along and they were mounted on cavalry, and they drove through the funeral crowd of, I've heard figures of 12,000, and it was only a town of 14,000 at the time. It also heralded another big problem in that the British essentially went on a 6-week rampage through Galway town and any of the towns around, and they killed 26 people, 11 of whom were Republicans. It's known to this day as the Galway Terror because of just what they did. And it turned, if there was any pro-Brits in Galway before that, it turned them totally around and made them determined that the Irish Republic, as far as possible, would be established. I think Séamus Quirk's life story and how it fits into the situation in Galway deserves to be turned into a pamphlet, because he gave his life the same as any other person around this graveyard gave his life for his country. He had to know, if he was in the Fianna as a lieutenant in a senior position and he was adjutant in Galway, he had to know that his life was at risk, and he left his lodgings to protect the family that had given him the lodgings. He is a hero of Ireland. God save Ireland.